I sat in that lawyer's office staring at words that erased me from my mother's will, and realized my brothers had turned her deathbed into a crime scene. The scent of lemon polish mixed with old paper filled my lungs as I read the impossible. Everything she'd promised to split 3 ways now belonged only to Mark and Leo, leaving me with nothing but a box of porcelain birds and the ashes of a family I'd thought I knew. The rain streaked down the panoramic windows of the downtown Chicago office, turning the November skyline into a gray watercolor of grief. I'd come here expecting sadness, expecting the formal closing of a chapter, expecting to mourn with my brothers, the woman who'd raised us to believe in fairness above all else. Instead, I was learning that the people who'd shared my childhood, who'd played in the same garden, eaten at the same table, and shaped by the same gentle hands, had orchestrated the most calculated betrayal I could imagine. Mr. Davies, the lawyer I'd never met, adjusted his glasses and continued reading in that monotone voice that seemed designed to drain emotion from devastating news. My mother's house in Oak Park, worth close to $1 million. Her carefully cultivated stock portfolio. Her savings account, built penny by penny over 40 years of teaching. These are to be divided equally between her sons Mark Wallace and Leo Wallace. The words hung in the air like smoke. I looked at Mark, my oldest brother, expecting him to interrupt, to tell the stranger he'd made a mistake. But Mark sat ramrod straight in his expensive suit, staring at a point on the mahogany table, his jaw clenched in what I'd mistaken for grief, but now recognized as grim determination. I turned to Leo, our baby brother, the sensitive one who'd always been the family peacemaker. He finally met my eyes for one terrible second, and I saw it all there. Guilt so heavy it bent his shoulders, shame that turned his face pale, and a silent plea for understanding he had no right to ask for. "Wait," I heard myself say, my voice thin and strange in my own ears. "Can you repeat that part about the house?" Mr. Davies looked at me over his glasses, his expression carrying the mild annoyance of someone interrupted during a routine task. "The tangible assets are bequeathed to your brothers. You receive the contents of a small checking account, approximately $8,000, and a selection of personal effects. $8,000. Barely enough to cover the funeral I'd already paid for. Personal effects. The porcelain bird collection Mom had kept on a shelf in the dining room. Items worth maybe a few $100s to a collector. Priceless to no one but her." That's when I saw it. A flicker of something on Mark's face that made my stomach drop. Not a triumphant grin, nothing so obvious. It was subtler, uglier. A small, satisfied curve at the corner of his mouth. The quiet smirk of a man who'd won a game I hadn't known we were playing. The room tilted. The polished table. The rain-soaked windows. The scent of furniture polish and lies. Everything swam together in a nauseating blur. My mother, Evelyn Wallace, had spent my entire life preaching fairness. "Everything will be split 3 ways," she'd told us 100 times. Her hands deep in the soil of her beloved garden. "A piece of my heart for each of you." This wasn't her final wish. This was a coup, staged in the hushed, sterile rooms of her dying days. And the people I trusted most, the brothers who were supposed to be my partners in grief, were the architects of my devastation. Before that lawyer's office, before the will that wasn't really hers, there was the garden. That's where I remember my mother best. Kneeling in rich, dark soil, a smudge of dirt on her cheek, and profound peace on her face. The garden was her sanctuary. A sprawling paradise of climbing roses, unwoolly hydrangeas, and defiant perennials that bloomed in riots of color from May until frost. I was her shadow there, my small hands learning to tell weeds from seedlings, my nose filled with the scent of damp earth and crushed lavender. "Everything needs its own space to grow, Clara," she'd told me once, gently separating the roots of two competing peony bushes. "But they also need each other. Strong roots make for a strong garden." Her philosophy on horticulture was her philosophy on family. She believed in our interconnectedness, in our shared roots. Mark was the sturdy oak, pragmatic, protective, always focused on structure and security. Leo was the willow, sensitive, artistic, bending with emotional winds. I was the wild climbing rose, independent but always winding my way back home. She loved us all fiercely, and I'd always believed, equally. Her promise of a three-way split wasn't about money. It was the ultimate expression of that equal love, the final tending of her garden. When she got sick, our roles shifted. Mark took over her finances, his spreadsheets and confident pronouncements a comforting illusion of control against chaos. "Don't you worry about the bills, Mom," he'd say, tapping his pen on stacks of papers. "I've got it all organized." Leo became the designated driver, ferrying her to appointments. His quiet presence a balm on her frayed nerves. But my role was different. I lived 10 minutes away, and I became her primary caregiver. I learned the complex rhythm of her medications, the art of making broth she could actually keep down, the subtle cues that signaled waves of pain. I spent afternoons reading poetry to her, and long evenings listening to stories of her childhood. We were closer than ever in those final months, our bond forged in the quiet intimacy of illness. Sometimes in moments of clarity between the fog of medication, she'd grip my hand. "You're a good daughter, Clara," she'd whisper, her voice thin as thread. "I don't know what I'd do without you. You and your brothers, you'll all be fine. You'll have each other, and you'll be provided for. I've made sure of it." I held those words like treasure. They were my comfort in the darkest hours, testament to her love and her unwavering sense of fairness. I never questioned her. I never thought to ask for details or check the paperwork. Mark was so diligently organizing. Why would I? We were family. We were strong roots in the same garden. The thought of betrayal was a weed so foreign I wouldn't have recognized it if it had sprouted at my feet. The day after the will reading, I woke feeling hollowed out. The grief for my mother was now tangled with newer, sharper pain. The sting of betrayal. My apartment felt strangely silent, the air thick with unspoken questions. I paced from living room to kitchen, my mother's porcelain birds, delivered in a box yesterday, staring at me with blank painted eyes. My phone buzzed. "Mark." I ignored it. It buzzed again. "Leo." I let that one go to voicemail too. 10 minutes later, a text from Mark appeared. "Clara, we need to talk. I know you're upset, but Mom had her reasons. She was worried about your financial stability. She knew Leo and I could manage the assets better. It's what she wanted." I read the text, and cold fury began replacing the hollow ache in my chest. Worried about my financial stability. It was true I wasn't wealthy. I was a librarian, a profession I'd chosen for love, not money. I'd had a failed attempt at opening a small bookstore a few years back. A dream that crashed and burned, leaving me with debt I was slowly, responsibly paying off. My mother had loaned me some of the startup money, a gift she'd given with nothing but encouragement. But Mark had always seen it as failure, a sign of my incompetence. Now he was twisting our mother's generosity into a posthumous vote of no confidence. He was weaponizing her love and using it as a shield for his greed. That was the moment the grief-stricken daughter began to recede, and someone else, someone more focused and determined, began to emerge. He thought I would crumble. He thought I would accept his condescending explanation and shuffle away with my box of birds and my broken heart. He had misjudged me. He'd forgotten I was my mother's daughter. I had her patience. I had her resilience. And I knew, better than anyone, how to tend a garden, how to gently, methodically pull a problem out by its roots. My first thought was a lawsuit, a messy public battle that would drag my mother's name through mud and incinerate what little was left of our family. I could picture the courtrooms, the depositions, the character assassinations. Mark would paint me as a gold-digging, irresponsible failure. The thought made me sick. It wasn't what my mother would have wanted. Vengeance wasn't her way. Justice, however, was. I made coffee, the bitter aroma cutting through the fog in my head, and sat at my kitchen table. I pulled out a notebook and pen. At the top of the page, I wrote a single question. What really happened? The first anomaly was the lawyer. My mother had been a client of Mr. Abernathy for as long as I could remember. A kind, grandfatherly man with a practice in a charming old brownstone. He'd handled my father's will, the sale of my grandparents' home. Every legal matter our family had ever had. Why the sudden change to a slick downtown firm? My hands shook as I dialed Abernathy and Sons. A friendly receptionist put me through. Clara, my dear, Mr. Abernathy's voice was warm and familiar. A sound from a more innocent time. I was so sorry to hear about Evelyn. She was a wonderful woman. Thank you, Mr. Abernathy. I'm calling because we had the reading of her will yesterday. Ah, of course. A difficult day. I have her final signed copy right here in my files. From 2018. Perfectly straightforward. Everything to be divided 3 ways. She was very clear on that point. The air caught in my throat. Mr. Abernathy, the will that was read yesterday was different. It was dated 6 weeks ago, and it was drafted by a different lawyer. The silence on the other end stretched like a wire pulled taut. When he finally spoke, his warm grandfatherly tone was gone, replaced by something sharp and concerned. What? That's impossible. Evelyn would have told me. We spoke just 3 months ago, and she was perfectly happy with her arrangements. Who was the lawyer? I gave him the name. Another silence. Clara, he said, his voice low and serious. Your mother's health. How was she in those final 2 months? She had good days and bad days, I admitted, memories flooding back. Towards the end, there were more bad than good. She was on a lot of medication for pain. Sometimes she would get confused. I see. The words were heavy with implication. Clara, this is highly irregular. It's what we call a red flag. A last-minute change to a long-standing will, a new and unknown attorney, beneficiaries who suddenly get everything, especially when the testator is in a vulnerable state. He paused. I can't officially advise you without being retained, but I urge you to be very, very careful. Find out exactly what happened on the day that document was signed. I hung up, cold resolve settling deep in my bones. Mr. Abernathy had given me my starting point. The new will was signed September 28th. I needed to reconstruct that day. I needed to find out who was with my mother, what her state of mind was, and how a stranger with a briefcase had found his way to her bedside. The investigation had begun. My next step was Maria. Maria Garcia was my mother's home health aide, a woman with a kind face and gentle hands who'd cared for Mom with tenderness that went far beyond her job description. She and my mother had formed a real bond, sharing stories and laughing over cups of tea during quiet afternoons. If anyone knew the rhythm of my mother's final weeks, it was her. I found her number and suggested coffee. She sounded hesitant, her voice guarded. I understood why. She was still employed by the estate, which now meant employed by Mark. She couldn't afford to be seen taking sides. We met at a small cafe near my apartment. I arrived first, choosing a quiet booth in the back. Maria slipped in minutes later, clutching her purse, her eyes darting around nervously. Thank you for meeting me, Maria, I said, offering a warm smile. I miss Mom so much, and I was hoping to talk to someone who was with her every day." Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "I miss her too. She was a special lady, always asking about my children, my family." We talked for a while, sharing fond memories. Her stubborn insistence on watching the evening news, her secret love for trashy reality TV, the way her face would light up when she talked about her garden. I let the conversation flow naturally, building a bridge of shared affection before I dared to walk across it. Finally, I took a breath. "Maria, I have to ask you about something. The lawyer said the will was signed on September 28th. Do you remember that day?" Her smile faded. She looked down at her hands, fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "I remember," she said quietly. "It was a Thursday. It was a bad day for your mother." "A bad day how?" She was confused. The doctor had increased her pain medication the night before, and she was foggy. She thought I was her sister, Helen, for most of the morning. She kept asking when we were going to the lake house, but your family never had a lake house. My blood ran cold. "Was anyone else there that day?" She nodded slowly. "Your brother Mark came in the afternoon. He brought a man with him. A man in a suit with a briefcase." I leaned forward, my heart thudding. "The lawyer?" "Yes, they went into the study with your mother. Mark said it was just some final paperwork for the estate, and that I should take my lunch break. He was very insistent." She hesitated, biting her lip. It felt strange. He was always so businesslike. But that day, he was agitated. Rushing. How long were they in there? Maybe half an hour. When they came out, the man in the suit left right away. Your mother seemed exhausted. I helped her back to bed, and she fell asleep almost immediately. Maria's eyes met mine. Before she did, she said something. What did she say? She said, "Mark is so worried about the money. I hope signing that paper makes him feel better. I'm just so tired of the papers." The words hung between us, a damning indictment. My mother, in a fog of pain and medication, hadn't been making a clear-headed decision about her legacy. She'd been placating a persistent, agitated son, signing a piece of paper to get some peace, to end a conversation she was too exhausted to have. Mark hadn't just influenced her. He'd taken advantage of her at her absolute weakest. I reached across the table and put my hand on Maria's. "Thank you. You have no idea how much this helps." She squeezed my hand back. "Your mother was a good woman, Clara. She loved all of you. She would not have wanted this." Leaving the cafe, the gray city streets felt different. The world was sharper, clear. The fog of my own grief and self-doubt had been burned away by clean, hot fire. Anger and purpose. I now had a witness. I had a timeline. And I had the truth, or at least the beginning of it. Mark had underestimated me, but he'd also underestimated our mother. He thought her legacy was a pile of assets to be managed and controlled. But her real legacy was the love she inspired in people like Maria, the loyalty she commanded from friends like Mr. Abernathy, and the strength she'd instilled in me. He was about to find out just how strong that legacy was. My next visit was to Eleanor Vance, my mother's best friend for over 50 years. Theirs was a friendship forged in PTA meetings and strengthened over countless cups of coffee, a bond that had weathered husbands, children, and the inevitable storms of life. Eleanor was a force of nature, sharp, witty, and fiercely loyal. If my mother had a secret keeper, it was her. I found her in her own magnificent garden, a friendly rival to my mother's. She was pruning rosebushes with grim determination, silver hair tucked under a wide-brimmed sun hat. She straightened as I approached, her eyes, though clouded with grief, as sharp as ever. "Clara," she said, pulling off her gardening gloves and embracing me in a hug that smelled of roses and earth. "I'm so glad you came. I've been worried sick about you." We sat on her porch swing, gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the giant maple that shaded her yard. I didn't beat around the bush. I told her everything. The lawyer's office, the shocking terms of the will, my conversation with Mr. Abernathy, and what Maria had told me. Eleanor listened without interrupting, her expression hardening with every word. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on vibrant blooms in her garden. "That boy," she finally said, her voice tight with anger. "That boy always had a greedy stroke. Your mother saw it, you know. She just chose to see the good in him instead." "Did she ever talk to you about the will? About changing it?" "Changing it?" Eleanor let out a short, sharp laugh. "Good heavens, no. The opposite. We had lunch, it must have been early August, one of her last good days when she felt up to going out. She was talking about the future, about you three. She told me, clear as day, 'Ellie, the only thing that gives me peace is knowing they'll all be taken care of. The house, the money. It's not much, but it's enough for each of them to have a solid foundation.' She was so proud of that." Eleanor's eyes narrowed in thought. But there was something else. She mentioned that Mark had been pressuring her. He kept bringing up your bookstore, calling it your financial blunder. He was trying to plant a seed, to make her think you were irresponsible. He suggested a trust, with him as the trustee, to protect your share. A trust? The idea was so patronizing, so typical of Mark. It took my breath away. "Oh, yes." Evelyn shut him down flat. "She told me she said to him, 'Clara is smarter than you think, Mark. She learns from her mistakes. Her heart is in the right place, and that's worth more than any stock portfolio.'" She was adamant. Eleanor reached over and patted my hand. "She never would have cut you out, Clara. Not in a million years. That document they had her sign, that wasn't your mother's will. It was Mark's." Her words were a balm on my wounded soul. My mother hadn't lost faith in me. She'd defended me. She'd believed in me. Mark hadn't just manipulated a sick woman. He'd actively worked to subvert her expressed wishes, twisting a narrative of concern to hide his blatant avarice. As I was leaving, Eleanor stopped me at the gate. "Wait, there's one more thing. Your mother kept meticulous records, for everything, especially her health. She had a daily journal she kept, right next to her bed. She wrote down how she was feeling, what medications she took, who visited. She said it helped her doctor keep track." I froze, my hand on the latch. A journal. Of course. My mother, the lifelong teacher, had always been a diligent record keeper. "Do you know where it is?" "I saw it the last time I visited, on her nightstand. A simple blue spiral-bound notebook. If your brothers haven't thrown it out, it could be the proof you need." I drove straight to my mother's house, my mind racing. The house was cold and unnervingly quiet, filled with the ghosts of laughter and life. Boxes were stacked in hallways, labeled in Mark's neat, sterile handwriting. Kitchenware, linens, Leo's art. It was a systematic dismantling of a life, cold and efficient. My key still worked in the front door. I slipped inside, my heart pounding. I was no longer just a grieving daughter. I was an intruder in my own past. I went straight to her bedroom. The bed was stripped, the mattress bare. The nightstand was empty, its surface wiped clean. My stomach plummeted. I frantically opened the single drawer. Old greeting cards, a rosary, hand lotion. No journal. I sank onto the edge of the bare mattress, despair washing over me. It was gone. The one piece of concrete evidence, written in her own hand, was gone. Then my eyes landed on the cedar chest at the foot of the bed. It was the one piece of furniture that seemed untouched, where she kept her most precious mementos. My father's military medals, our baby shoes, stacks of old letters, tied with faded ribbon. I knelt and lifted the heavy lid. The familiar scent of cedar and thyme washed over me. I began to sift through layers of memory, my fingers brushing against crinkled photographs and brittle newspaper clippings. And then I saw it. Tucked beneath a pile of my old report cards was a simple blue spiral-bound notebook, her journal. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. They'd missed it, assuming the chest contained nothing but worthless sentiment. I sat on the floor and opened it to the last month. Her handwriting, once so elegant and precise, was shaky, a frail echo of its former self. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning daily entries. September 25th, bad night. Pain was a 9. Maria is an angel. Leo brought soup. September 26th, Dr. Miller increased the morphine, feeling very floaty. Mark visited, talked about finances again. So tiring. September 27th, slept most of the day, dreamed of the garden and spring, woke up and thought it was 1988. And then I found it. The entry for September 28th, the day she signed the will. The handwriting was barely legible, a spidery scrawl that strayed across the lines. Mark came with a lawyer, a new man, said it was just to make things easier for the taxes. Many pages. My head feels full of cotton. Signed where he showed me. He seemed so anxious. Just wanted him to go, so I could sleep. I closed the journal, holding it to my chest. It felt as heavy and sacred as a holy text. This was it. The proof. Written in her own hand. My head feels full of cotton. Just wanted him to go, so I could sleep. It wasn't the act of a sound mind. It was an act of exhaustion, of a dying woman being badgered into submission. I had the timeline from Maria, the confirmation of intent from Eleanor, and now the final heartbreaking piece of the puzzle from my mother herself. I had everything I needed. Now I had to decide what to do with it. The image of a courtroom still felt wrong, a violation of her memory. No, this wasn't going to be a public spectacle. This was going to be a family matter. I would confront them not with lawyers and threats, but with the simple, undeniable truth. I would force them to look at what they'd done, to face the last words their mother ever wrote about them. The confrontation needed the right setting. A sterile conference room or public restaurant wouldn't do. It had to be a place that held the weight of our shared history, a place they couldn't escape from the memory of the woman they'd betrayed. It had to be her house. I sent a simple text to both Mark and Leo. We need to have a final meeting at Mom's house to decide on the last of her things. Saturday at 2 p.m. Please be there. Mark's reply was immediate and businesslike. Fine. Leo's came an hour later. A simple okay. I could feel his reluctance through the screen. I spent the next 2 days preparing, not like a lawyer preparing for trial, but like an actor preparing for the role of a lifetime. I photocopied the relevant pages from my mother's journal and the doctor's notes from her medical file. I made a list of key dates and conversations. I rehearsed my opening words, not to sound scripted, but to ensure I wouldn't be derailed by anger or tears. I needed to be calm, methodical, and immovable. My grief was the fuel, but cold, hard reason would be my weapon. Saturday arrived, gray and overcast, mirroring the mood of that first day in the lawyer's office. I got to the house early and walked through the rooms, drawing strength from the lingering essence of my mother. I stood in the doorway of her study, the room where the betrayal was formalized. I ran my hand over the back of her favorite armchair. I'm doing this for you, Mom, I whispered into the quiet air. I'll make it right. They arrived separately. Mark strode in first, briefcase in hand, already impatient. All right, Clara. Let's make this quick. I have a tea time at 4. Leo shuffled in behind him, avoiding my eyes, his shoulders slumped. He looked like a man being led to his own execution. There's no rush, I said, my voice even and calm. I gestured toward the dining room table, where my mother had hosted countless holiday dinners. Please sit down. They exchanged a look, a flicker of confusion. This wasn't the tearful, emotional sister they were expecting. I'd arranged 3 chairs around the table, and in front of my own, I placed a single slim manila folder. Mark sat, tapping his fingers on the polished wood. "So, what's this about? The furniture?" Leo and I agreed we'd sell most of it. "This isn't about the furniture," I said, my gaze moving from him to Leo, forcing our youngest brother to finally look at me. "This is about the will." Mark sighed, a long theatrical exhalation of impatience. "Clara, we've been over this. I know it's difficult to accept, but Mom made her decision. She wanted—" "I know what she wanted," I interrupted, my voice cutting through his condescending tone. I opened the folder. "I know because she told me. She told Eleanor, and she told her lawyer of 40 years, Mr. Abernathy." Mark's jaw tightened, Leo's face went white. "I spoke with him, Mark," I continued, keeping my eyes locked on his. "He has a copy of her actual will, the one from 2018, where she leaves everything equally to her 3 children. He was very surprised to hear about a new will, drafted by a lawyer he's never heard of, just 6 weeks before she died." I slid the first document across the table, a copy of my phone records with the call to Abernathy and Sons highlighted. It was small, but tangible. It showed I wasn't just speculating. "You're bluffing," Mark sneered, but a bead of sweat had appeared on his temple. "Am I?" I looked at Leo. "Leo, do you remember September 28th, a Thursday?" Leo flinched as if I'd struck him. He stared down at his hands, unable to speak. "I spoke to Maria," I said gently. "She remembers that day very well. She remembers you, Mark, arriving with a strange man. She remembers Mom being confused, thinking it was years ago, calling her by the wrong name. She remembers you telling her to take a long lunch break." I slid another piece of paper across the table. A typed summary of my conversation with Maria. Mark glanced at it and shoved it back toward me. "The caregiver's word against mine? That's not proof of anything." "You're right," I said calmly. "It's not. It's just context." I paused, letting the silence stretch, letting them both squirm. Then I played my final card. I took the photocopied pages from my mother's journal and placed them in the center of the table. "This, however," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, "is proof. This is Mom's journal, her own words, written on the day you had her sign her life away." I turned the page so they could read the spidery, desperate script. I watched their faces as they took in the words. "My head feels full of cotton. Signed where he showed me. Just wanted him to go, so I could sleep." The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Mark stared at the page, his arrogant facade finally cracking, his face a mask of disbelief and fury at being caught. But it was Leo who broke. A choked sob escaped his lips. He pushed his chair back, covering his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking. "I told you," he wept, his voice muffled. "I told you it was wrong, Mark. I told you she didn't understand. But you said we were protecting her. Protecting the family." "Shut up, Leo," Mark hissed, his eyes darting between me and his blubbering brother. He looked like a cornered animal. "Protecting the family?" I asked, my voice laced with ice. "Or protecting your own ego, your resentment over the bookstore alone, your belief that you're the only one smart enough to handle money?" I leaned forward. "You didn't protect her. You preyed on her. You saw her at her weakest, most vulnerable moment, and you used her exhaustion and her love for you to steal her legacy. You didn't just take my inheritance, Mark. You corrupted her memory." The room was silent except for Leo's ragged crying. Mark said nothing. He just stared at the journal entry, at the undeniable proof of his deception, written in the hand of the mother he claimed to be honoring. The power in the room had shifted completely. I held all the cards. I took a final steadying breath. "So, here is what's going to happen," We have two options. Option 1 is that I take this journal, along with testimony from Maria, Eleanor, Mr. Abernathy, and my mother's medical records showing her cognitive state, and I hand it all to a lawyer. We will contest the will. It will be ugly, it will be public, and it will be expensive. We will spend our mother's money dragging her final days through a courtroom, and you will lose. I guarantee it. I let that sink in. Or, I continued, there is option 2. You call Mr. Davies and you inform him that you will not be submitting the second will to probate due to clear evidence of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. We will all agree to abide by the terms of the original 2018 will, the one Mr. Abernathy holds. We will divide our mother's estate exactly as she always intended, fairly and in 3 equal parts. We will handle this quietly, with dignity, and we will salvage the last shred of respect for her memory. I looked from one brother to the other. The choice is yours. Mark stared at me, his eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and grudging respect. He knew he was beaten. Leo, through his tears, just nodded numbly, a gesture of complete and total surrender. The silence in the dining room was no longer about grief or tension. It was the silence of defeat, the silence of justice, quietly and irrevocably served. In the end, there was no fight left in them. Faced with the quiet, irrefutable weight of truth, my brothers folded. Mark, ever the pragmatist, recognized that a public court battle would cost him more in legal fees and reputation than he stood to gain. Leo, consumed by guilt, was simply relieved to have the deception over. They agreed to my terms. The second will was nullified, and our mother's original fair-minded will was honored. The house was sold, the assets liquidated, and the proceeds were divided into 3 equal shares, just as she'd always wanted. The financial injustice was corrected. But money was never the heart of the matter. The real aftermath was the chilling silence that fell between us. We were still brothers and sister, bound by blood and shared childhood, but the trust, the easy intimacy was gone forever, shattered into a million pieces. Our relationship was redefined by the stark new boundaries I erected. There were no more casual phone calls, no more dropping by unannounced. Holidays became polite, carefully orchestrated affairs, brief and shallow, filled with unspoken words. I loved them, because a part of me would always love the boys I grew up with. But I no longer liked or trusted the men they'd become. I hadn't set out to destroy my family, but I'd been forced to save myself from it. And in doing so, I'd found a strange, bittersweet freedom. My real healing didn't come from a bank transfer. It came from the connections I'd fortified during my quiet investigation. I found myself spending more and more time with Eleanor. We'd work in her garden, our hands in the dirt, sharing stories about my mother. In me, she saw the daughter she never had. In her, I found maternal wisdom and unconditional support I desperately needed. She filled part of the void my mother had left, not as a replacement, but as a continuation of her legacy of love. I also kept in touch with Maria. We would meet for coffee, our conversations no longer shadowed by secrets. We talked about our children, our jobs, our hopes. We were 2 very different women from 2 different worlds, brought together by our shared affection for a woman who touched both our lives. This, I realized, was the community my mother had built, one based not on obligation or blood, but on genuine kindness and mutual respect. The most profound sense of closure came from the one place it all began, my mother's garden. The new owners of the house had no interest in gardening, and they agreed to let me transplant some of my mother's most treasured plants to my own small yard and to the local community garden she'd helped establish years ago. One bright, warm afternoon in late spring, I was on my knees in the rich soil of the community garden, carefully planting a row of her favorite David Austin roses. The sun was warm on my back, and the air was sweet with the scent of freshly turned earth and blooming lilac. Around me, other members of the garden club, friends of my mother's, people I now knew by name, were laughing and tending to their own plots. As I gently firmed the soil around the base of a rose bush, I thought about the inheritance that wasn't, and the one that truly was. My brothers had tried to claim the material wealth, the stocks and the property, believing that was her legacy. But they'd been wrong. Her real inheritance wasn't something you could quantify on a spreadsheet. It was this garden. It was the loyalty of an old friend, the kindness of a caregiver, the resilience she'd passed down to me. It was the strength to pull out weeds by the root, and the patience to cultivate something beautiful in their place. I looked at my hands, covered in the same dark, rich soil that had clung to her own for so many years. The money was in my bank account, a symbol of the justice I'd fought for. But the peace, the real lasting peace, was here, in Miss Garden, under the open sky. I'd lost a mother, and in many ways, I'd lost my brothers. But I'd found myself. And in cultivating a life of truth, dignity, and new, healthier connections, I was honoring her in a way no last will and testament ever could. The perennials we planted would return, year after year, stronger and more vibrant than before. And so would I.